Hello, 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 everybody, and welcome to Not Your Nana's Norms with your host, Dr. Amy, sociologist and educator. Now, before we go on any further, I want to acknowledge the Wadawurrung people, the traditional custodians of this land, and extend my respect to elders past and present, and of course to all First Nations peoples listening here today. So, as always, if you've listened to my previous episodes, you will know that each month, Not Your Nana's Norms focuses on a particular setting, place, or situation, and we explore those taken for granted social norms that appear so normal and natural, but are actually a really delicate performance that we take on every day. And today we are going to focus on a topic that's going to be so much fun. The social norms of kids' birthday parties. So if you listen to the last episode, you will know that I do have a bit of a confession to make, because I know originally this episode was going to be something that will cover all the big celebration meals, including things like adult birthday parties, the 21st and the 18th, that sort of thing, as well as Christmas and Easter, and of course all things dining out. But your Dr. Amy has just too much to say. So these topics are going to need to be explored in future episodes. And I promise I will get to them eventually. But for now, go grab a cuppa, maybe put your party hat on and enjoy a discussion all about the social norms of kids' birthday parties. So let's start with a couple of quick reviews from last month's episode about everyday meals. The first one is from LH. They said, "I loved your podcast. It does have me reflect on my childhood and something that my father said about his childhood. At the dinner table for him, it was children should be seen and not heard. He hated it." Thank you, LH. That is actually really interesting, and I'm actually really so glad that it got you thinking and reflecting as well. I also got another review from AS. They said, "Dr. Amy is great." Great vibe and energy around this podcast. Also super easy to listen to. Thank you for doing this podcast. Oh, thank you, AS. That really does mean a lot. I also wanted to send a really big shout out to my sponsor for the next few episodes. This is a brand I've personally been buying for years. Shebang Woman makes super lattes for perimenopause and menopause. And no, they're not a coffee. They have delicious flavors like rose and vanilla, chai latte, and salted caramel, all with magnesium and collagen, plus a plant-based hot chocolate with hops instead of collagen. And each cuppa has about 50% of your recommended daily intake of magnesium, and 9 in 10 women say it really does make a difference. It's been formulated by 2 women in Ballina, New South Wales, one who is a clinical nutritionist who really needed it themselves. They have also given my listeners a discount code, so just type in NANA10 for $10 off your order of any full-size product. Go check them out at shebangwoman.com unpacking.com.au and feel the whole shebang again through perimenopause and beyond. Right, so let's get into this. And honestly, when thinking about dining out and celebration meals, how could I not start with the most exciting birthday parties ever? The ones we had as kids. Now, look, obviously I can't speak for everyone, but my memory of middle class 1980s suburban Australia was that kids' birthday parties were a very big deal. So in my family and in most of the families I knew, we almost always had 2 celebrations for our birthday every year as children. The first one would be a small family party on the day of your birthday, and then you'd have another party with your friends doing something that you enjoy. So let's start with that first party, the family party. And this was usually pretty small. In my case, it was just mum and dad and my sisters. And the day was always a pretty normal day. You know, you'd have to go to school, do your homework, just the usual things. But we'd always have a slightly more special dinner. And by that I mean not special in the sense that we'd dress up or have to do anything differently, but special in the sense that the birthday person got the opportunity to choose the meal that everyone would eat for dinner. So, you know, if your favourite meal was spag bowl, then everybody got to have spag bowl for dinner. If your favourite was corned beef, like my sister, then it was corned beef for everyone. And honestly, while I do like corned beef, my younger sister loved corned beef and actually still does. So it was a regular request. I can't remember what my favourite dinner was. So, I'm guessing it must have changed every year. But then for dessert, Mum would buy or make a simple cake of your choosing. And look, I wasn't actually really a big fan of cake. I tended to prefer the icing, to be honest. But I do remember loving, arguably, the best 1980s invention ever, the Viennetta ice cream cake. Does everyone remember this? It was honestly the height of yumminess and fanciness in the 1980s. And I do think they still sell them now at the shops, but I haven't really looked for a while. But back then, drool, wafer-thin layers of chocolate with vanilla ice cream and that kind of crinkle-cut design. Yummy! Another favourite of mine, which honestly you could barely call it a cake because it was literally made from chocolate biscuits and cream, and that's about it, was the chocolate ripple cake. Oh my gosh, I loved that cake. And in some ways, I guess it's kind of a precursor to all the cookies and cream desserts that are actually everywhere now. Anyway, whatever cake it was, after dinner, the lights would go off and Mum or Dad would start singing happy birthday to you, and they'd bring in the cake that was lit with candles, and normally as many candles as you were old. So if you were turning 8 years old, then the cake would have 8 candles and so forth. But I can definitely remember trying to convince my mum to let me put the number of candles that she needed to represent her birthday. Oh dear, I can't remember if we actually pulled it off because honestly, it would have meant 30 plus candles on a family-sized cake. But I'm sure we gave it a red hot go. Anyway, at the end of the happy birthday song, You'd blow out all the candles, and then everyone would be given a piece of cake. We'd also be given a present from mum and dad, and possibly another one from your siblings if you're lucky. Nana and Poppy would also usually send a card or a small present, along with other relatives too. Now, for the second birthday celebration that my family and many 1980s kids had, this was a much bigger, more elaborate affair. And it normally landed on the weekend following or preceding your birthday day. And this was your opportunity to invite your friends over to your house. You'd handwrite the invitations over and over and over again so that each person could have one. Because, remember, back then we did not have computers, my friends. We'd blow up balloons and we'd put streamers all around the house. Honestly, it wasn't anything too fancy or coordinated. Maybe you would just make sure that you've got your favourite colour in there, but, nothing too fancy. And then you'd get to dress up in your favourite 1980s best. And, well, I can leave that to your imagination. But, it would have been a lot of bright colours, maybe some frilly skirts. Oh, and of course the obligatory leg warmers. Oh, dear. Also, during this time, it was pretty common to have separate gender-based events. So you'd have girls' parties and boys' parties. And so for me and my sisters, we'd usually end up having half a dozen or so girls dropped off to our house in their 1980s party best. Each girl would normally bring a little, usually fairly inexpensive gift, because we'd often be invited to several of these parties throughout the year. So keeping the gifts reasonably small was a big part of the expected social norms of these parties. And then we'd play party games like Pass the Parcel or musical chairs, or sometimes, if we're lucky, we got to have what we girls absolutely loved having, which was a sleepover party. This is basically where half a dozen girls camp out in the lounge room in sleeping bags, torturing parents by chatting and giggling all night after overloading on fatty, salty, sugary foods. Woohoo! I remember absolutely loving it, but my parents despised it. The party meal, as I said, included things like shop-bought party pies and mini hot dogs with tomato sauce, maybe some simple recipes like aeroplane jelly or chocolate crackles or honey joys. Of course, you got to have Cotty's cordial and fairy bread. Now, for my overseas listeners or anybody else who doesn't know, this is basically some white bread, butter or margarine with hundreds and thousands sprinkled all over it. There was very little in the way of individualised food or meals catering to a specific guest, unless, of course, you had a kid who was coming along who had a serious allergy, which, look, in my memory was pretty rare back then, but everybody else was expected to just find something to eat from the treat foods that were available on the table. Then came arguably the most important thing about kids' birthday parties: the party cake. And in 1980s Australia, the expected social norm was that your mum would bake something similar or directly from the Australian Women's Weekly Cake Cookbook. Incidentally, if you do not know about this cookbook, Google it. It is awesome. So many of my peeps from my generation lovingly speak about our mums making absolute magic, honestly, by turning those simple cake recipes into trains and princesses and teddies and, oh look, so many other things. And honestly, even if you don't like eating cake, like me, it was always so cool to see these cakes at my party and then all the parties of my little friends. At the end of the party, kids would then be given a very simple little lolly bag, nothing fancy, just cheap lollies and a balloon in a plastic bag. I don't remember a lot of themed parties as such at the time. I know there were some kids who were starting to have parties at Macca's or maybe the roller skating rink, but this type of party seemed to happen more and more and more as we moved into the 1990s and then into the 2000s. A bit of a side note here, I'm actually the eldest child in our family, and so I have sisters who were born in the 80s and 90s and one who was born in the 2000s. And then my son also was born in the mid-2000s. So it's actually been really interesting for me to see how the social norms of kids' parties has changed as we reached the end of the 20th century and then moved into that 21st century. The other thing I really wanted to mention here was that just like everyday meals, kids' parties were and are still greatly impacted by the social norms and expectations of the time. In the 1980s, as we learned from our previous episode, mums were being expected to juggle more and more and more than ever to maintain their role as a good, involved mum, but also trying to work outside the home with very minimal assistance from the outside. We're also heading to a recession in Australia that's coming by the late 1980s. And so, of course, it makes total sense that this 1980s kids party was often focused on simple but very kid-centric fun at home, with some elements of personalisation for the birthday child, but largely relying on the shop-bought, crowd-friendly food and the readily available and affordable decorations. Now, before we talk about 21st century birthday parties, I really wanted to briefly comment on my nana's role in my birthday parties and the norms of birthday parties that her silent generation would have experienced as children. Now, I don't actually remember many birthday parties with my nana, and honestly, this is largely because my birthday always fell during the school term time. And now we lived in the big smoke and my nana still lived regionally. But she always sent me a card and a small present. And you guessed it. It was always something modest or practical. So a beach towel or soap or maybe a mug with my name on it. And I would also say that 9 times out of 10, the gift that she would have bought me was what I would have defined as feminine and never extravagant and rarely something that I explicitly asked for, because she continued to live in line with her favourite saying of elegant sufficiency when it came to presents too. I also did some digging about the social norms of birthday parties for the silent generation, and I was actually really surprised to find out that in some ways they actually weren't that different to the norms that I remember of my 1980s childhood birthday parties. The party invitations would have been handwritten and dropped off to the neighbour's house or to a friend at the local school. And the party would have been at home or in the backyard, and everyone played simple party games. There were simple decorations, and of course, little small gifts for the birthday child. But there were some key differences. Firstly, all of the party food and decorations had to be homemade, using ingredients that were definitely not everyday foods, but they did have to be simple, particularly due to the lingering concerns that they would have had around wartime rationing. This would have included perhaps a homemade sponge cake, maybe some simple sandwiches, some fairy bread and cordial or something like that. Also, the party would have included everyone in the neighbourhood. So not just your mates from school or the neighbourhood, but also their siblings and their mum and their dad as well. It definitely wasn't a situation where parents just dropped off their invited child and left. The overall feel of the party would have likely been quite modest and polite and very structured. And kids would have been expected to be well behaved, essentially like little polite mini adults. The party would also have been exactly the same for every child, with very little room for individualization. I really doubt that many Silent Generation kids could have requested a teddy bear shaped cake or a princess cake, and honestly they would have been expected to just enjoy whatever they were given, even if they didn't like it at all. It's equally interesting to see how things have changed with children's parties as we moved into that 21st century. So by the time my son was born in 2006, parties had become much more of a sort of personalised and curated experience. We saw a lot of parties that were theme-based on the child's interests, like dinosaurs or fairies or elves or Minecraft or Bluey, that sort of thing. And many families were starting to choose the all-inclusive venue-based parties, places like fairy gardens or bowling alleys or indoor play or trampoline centres, and family restaurants such as Macca's. And basically this allowed you, as the host, to avoid that big clean-up at home. Wahoo! And then you just pay a fee per child for the activity, party food, and normally a staff member to assist and supervise and entertain the kiddies. Excellent. We now all had mobile phones too, so we could quickly and easily create personalised party invites and send them out digitally via Messenger or School or other apps. And rather than having to write out each individual invitation by hand, and we all had digital cameras that were actually in our phones. So taking lots of cute pics of the kids and sharing them with other parents was honestly a pretty big requirement at the time. And overall, the party was kind of both about having fun for the kids, but also there was a social norm around creating a kind of aesthetically pleasing place for everyone. And as we move towards the 2010s and definitely into the 2020s, we see norms changing, particularly with a much greater emphasis around inclusivity for kids at parties. So, for example, where possible, you'd invite the whole class to your party so that no one felt left out. We'd also use more gender-neutral language, so it's birthday person, party host, or kids rather than boys and girls, as well as ensuring that there were more all-gender games and activities available for all the guests. Plus, party foods became increasingly diverse, so we included a lot more healthier options such as fruit and things like that, as well as catering for guests' allergies and food intolerances or religious beliefs. I think also there's been a real increase in people's understanding and respect of the sensory needs of kids. So, if need be, hosts make sure they consider avoiding loud music or bright strobing lights during the party in case this will cause anyone distress. And finally, people's awareness and consciousness of the risk of germs has exploded, especially, and for obvious reasons, post-COVID. So now you'll often see individual cupcakes rather than shared cake for 20 kids. Side note here, it is actually quite amazing how we managed to survive the 1980s for so many reasons. But the idea that it was perfectly acceptable to let kids who, let's be honest, are not really known for their excellent hygiene, take a really big deep breath and then blow all over the cake to make sure all the candles went out. And I'm sure sometimes there were a few raspberries in there too. Ugh, yuck. Honestly, I'd be quite curious to know what this has been like for you lately and what you're seeing. Are you seeing big shared cakes anymore with the candle ceremony, or is it just a little individual one? So when we look at the social norms of Aussie kids' parties across the generations, you can see that there are probably three key major shifts. So firstly, we move from a party that's centred around home and neighbourhood and community to one that's outside the home, where more of the labour and the work has been outsourced. Secondly, we move from a party that's largely parent-led and homogenous, i.e. every kid's party was basically the same, with clear boundaries and good manners a big priority, to a party that encourages kids to express their own interests and identity through the party themes and choices. And thirdly, we see a real change in the way inclusiveness is expressed via kids' parties. So, for example, in the 1980s parties, they were often highly gendered with boys and girls parties and things like that, whereas parties today are inclusively gender neutral and use gender neutral themes and language. This got me thinking about what would be some of the key faux pas or examples of rule breaking at birthday parties across the generations. And I think that for kids in the silent generation, the main faux pas would have revolved around politeness. So I'm sure that my Nana and Poppy would have been in so much trouble if they did not say thank you when they received a gift, even if they didn't like it, or refused to eat the lovingly made cake, even if Mum accidentally added too much salt instead of sugar, something like that. And as for the grown-ups at these parties, oh goodness, imagine if you did not supervise your child properly, or they started being boisterous or noisy. Shock, horror. Or maybe you brought an expensive, extravagant gift for a boy when the birthday child was actually a girl. The shame, the embarrassment. And for us kids of the 1980s, I'd say probably the biggest faux pas was bringing a babyish present. Can you imagine? Or maybe not joining in with the party games. Or if your mum or dad were being too strict with the group, or only offering healthy food. Imagine, my 1980s fellow listeners, imagine if you had turned up to a kid's party in the 1980s with their mum and dad hovering over you all the time, and then all they had was veggies and dips and crackers to eat. Just imagine for a second the teasing that you would have got from your friends. No. And as for the kiddos in the 21st century, I think the biggest no-no would probably be around exclusion. So things like ignoring or making fun of someone's dietary needs or religious beliefs would just be completely unacceptable today. Also, bringing a gift that clashes with the family's values. So if you brought something that could be defined as a weapon or a gender-specific gift or a noisy battery-operated toy when the families explicitly said no. We are also more digitally aware than ever before, so posting photos of other people's kids without permission is a major modern breach of the expected kids' party social norms. I also think that kids' parties faux pas actually tells us something really interesting about what was valued and the ways in which childhood was socially constructed in each era. So, Silent Gen childhood was really like a training ground for polite adulthood. Whereas Gen X childhood was focusing on learning independence, having fun, and resilience. But today, we tend to value a childhood that's based on emotional safety, inclusion, and somewhat individualized or curated experiences. A couple of other relevant points to note about kids' birthday parties before I leave you today. Firstly, the ritual or social norm of singing that happy birthday to you song is now honestly so universal that it feels like we must have been singing it forever. But based on what I found, it seems like it only really started being the standard birthday song from the mid-20th century onwards. And that means that Nana and her generation were actually the first cohort of kids to experience it by hearing it at school and then making it the birthday song. Before that, most Aussie peeps, especially those with British heritage, sang that For He's a Jolly Good Fellow song. So I think we all know that the happy birthday song is still sung now, but I have noticed that there is increased awareness that everything could and often is caught on camera. And so I think there is a worry that people might feel silly or look silly, particularly that older teens, older kids cohort. I think it's also really interesting to reflect on the norms around alcohol for parents at kids' parties. So when Nana was a kid, adults drank alcohol at kids' parties because it wasn't framed as drinking at a kid's party. It was just a culture, the drinking culture that was around, and it was just a normal part of social gatherings, including these family events. And as we talked about, the parties were usually at home and parents just having a beer or a sherry or a port while the kids played was totally common. And honestly, there was absolutely zero expectation of sobriety around kids. I'd also say for 1980s kids' parties, it was a pretty common thing to see mum or dad having a glass of beer or a glass of wine as the kids played at the party. There definitely wasn't any stigma around having a quick drink in the 1980s whilst you're supervising kids. But today, while we see that alcohol is still present, it's much more socially moderated and honestly increasingly discouraged, depending, of course, on the context. But there's much greater awareness and a social expectation of child safety, responsible supervision, modelling behaviour, plus also cultural and religious diversity alongside the usual health and well-being type things. And of course, we do see a lot more kids' parties occurring at venues like trampoline parks and play centres and things like that, where alcohol is restricted or banned. So, especially something like heavy drinking at a kids' party would be a pretty big faux pas in Australia now. Another interesting social norm that has changed over time is the idea of a formal RSVP. Over time, you can see that we've moved from kids' parties where RSVPing would have been an optional courtesy for the silent generation towards a sort of semi-important option for my generation, and then towards an absolutely essential. So the small local home-based parties of the silent generation, they're just including close neighbours and friends. And so the RSVP, if it was given at all, was likely just a simple verbal response, like, we'll be there on Saturday, rather than something formal in writing. And if someone didn't RSVP but then showed up, it wasn't really a big problem. You could just add another sandwich or something like that to the platter. But by the time I was a kid, RSVPs were probably expected, but sometimes people didn't do them, and it wasn't a really big deal. Generally, our mums needed rough numbers for catering, but sometimes kids just turned up without replying and, they just rolled with it. But for kids' parties now, RSVPs are critical and they're often digitally tracked. Why? Well, because parties now happen at venues like trampoline parks that have strict capacity limits, as well as a need for safety and sensory planning, dietary requirements, and taking into consideration things like allergies. Also, the ease and speed of RSVPing via text or social media means that there are really no excuses not to let the party host know that your child is or is not going to attend. Because RSVPing shows respect to the host that there is going to be a high cost associated with the party, and a lot of parties are paying per kid and per hour. All right, folks, that is your lot this month. I truly hope that you enjoyed this exploration of kids' parties and the social norms throughout the ages. I am sure that there was much, 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 much more that we could talk about. And as always, I would love to hear from you about your experiences and thoughts on this topic. So you can email me anytime at notyournannasnorms@outlook.com. It's all lowercase, no spaces, and no punctuation. Of course, you can also message me via Facebook or Patreon, because I truly love hearing from you, and I promise I will respond to each of you. Please, 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 everybody also take a couple of minutes to rate and review the podcast on your preferred platform, because this really does make a big difference to me. And as always, if you would like to, and you can, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon, because this will allow me to focus on researching and growing this podcast. And it does just start from $3 a month, and that's nothing, folks, isn't it? Just a cuppa a month. Now, next month is going to be a surprise. Largely because, honestly, I have not quite decided what the topic's going to be. Oh dear. Sorry, folks. But I will let you know on Facebook and on Patreon once I've settled on a topic. But until then, have a lovely, lovely, lovely few weeks, peeps. Signing off.